All right. Let's do this. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hardeep Singh, your host for today. Welcome and also a big thank you for joining us today on our last session of this four-part series on Inside VMware Cloud Foundation 9.1. Now, before we kick off this session, let me share with you some important information. So every year we have VMware Explore. So this is our premier annual cloud and virtualization event hosted by Broadcom. It focuses on enterprise software, modern private clouds, and local AI workloads built on platforms like VMware Cloud Foundation. Now, this is happening very soon. It's on the 31st of August, the 3rd of September in Las Vegas. I know the dates are coming up really fast, but even better news to share is that VMware Explore on Tour will be coming closer to you in Mumbai and Singapore. And on the dates that you can see now on the screen, and we are really, really excited to share with you our latest updates. You can also get your certifications done, exams there, hands-on labs to try, and so in order for you to do that, can you please click on the link or scan the QR code and register to book your spot. All right, so moving on, if you have followed us all the way on this four-part series, we have covered end-to-end cyber resilience, followed by how to deploy modern apps faster and scale smarter with VKS in VCF 9.1, and modern infrastructure streamlining operations with VCF 9.1. And to round off the learnings today, we will cover operating the fleet and delivering self-service consumption in VCF. This is an important session, and to share these key insights with you, we have Vincent Han, Executive Solutions Architect based in Singapore. And if you're attending Explore on Tour in Singapore, you'll get to meet and listen to him in person. Today, Vincent will share how VCF 9.1 simplifies the deployment, operation, and lifecycle management of a private cloud, from architecture and fleet deployment through to centralized updates. You'll also hear about patching and ongoing operations through some live demos that he will share. And he's joined by a panel of extremely talented subject matter experts, Alec, Arun, and David here, who are ready to answer any questions that you might have along the way. So please remember to drop your questions only in the Q&A box. Do not put them in the chat. We will try and answer as many questions as we can in the Q&A box. With that, let me hand over to Vincent now. Over to you, Vincent.
Thank you, Hadid. So it's going to be a jam-packed session, a lot of things to cover on fleet management, 9.1 updates, and how you do upgrades and things like that. So let's dive into it. So let us start looking at the high-level architecture of VCF and what's new in VCF 9.1. A VCF private cloud is implemented on a modular architecture built on three constructs that you can see on the screen: the workload domain, the VCF instance, as well as the VCF fleet. So first, we have the workload domain. At the core of the VCF architecture is this workload domain. So a workload domain is a logical unit of application-ready infrastructure that groups ESXi hosts into one or more vSphere clusters, each providing specific performance, availability, or security characteristic. So think of a workload domain as a standardized, repeatable unit of private cloud capacity, bundling compute, storage, and networking into an isolated pool. Because workload domains are managed through automation, you can create, scale, or delete them on demand. In addition, each workload domain is managed and life-cycled independently. So just to give you some examples over here, so we have seen like customers deploying workload domain, one workload domain for example, in the demilitarized zone, right? DMZ zone, sorry. We also have the workload domain deployed for enterprise workloads, right? So these are some examples on how you can actually deploy a workload domain. And then next, we have the VCF instance. So VCF instance is one or more workload domains that are logically combined into a VCF instance. A VCF instance represents the collection of workload domains within a single location or site. VCF instance share a common software depot and collection of VCF management services. And then lastly here, we have the VCF fleet. So VCF instances are then grouped into VCF fleets. Each VCF fleet is managed from a set of centralized services provided by a VCF operations over here and a VCF automation. So that's give you the private cloud constructs within VCF Cloud Foundation. So moving on. So VCF Fleets provides the centralized management framework to scale independent VCF instances into a resilient multi-region private cloud. So as you can see here, you have like region A, region B, right? And each of these region has its own fleet. So VCF private cloud aggregates one or more fleets into a unified operation environment. The beauty of this architecture lies in its modularity, allowing a private cloud to scale from a single deployment to a massive global operations. For a small organization, a VCF private cloud might consist of a single fleet containing just one VCF instance with 2 or 3 workload domains, providing a simple automated footprint. As the enterprise grows, it can gain flexibility by adding multiple instances across different geographic regions to ensure low latency and disaster recovery, all while maintaining unified visibility through the fleet centralized operations. For the largest global entities, the ability to aggregate multiple fleets into a singular private cloud means that they can maintain regional autonomy and compliance standards while still benefiting from a high-level, cohesive operational strategy that spans thousands of hosts across the globe. So, at its core, this first release of VCF management services combines several key platform services such as the Fleet Manager, VCF Logs, and the Fleet Depot service. So just to give you an introduction here, in VCF 9.1, we kind of release this new component or platform we call the VCF Manager services. This is new in VCF 9.1, okay? So these VCF management services combine several key platform services such as the Fleet Manager, VCF Logs, and the Fleet Depot service, just to name a few examples, into a single common framework. The goal here is simple: to streamline how you deploy, consume, and manage and scale VCF services, or what referred as components inside the VCF management services, helping to streamline deployments, drive a much faster time to value while keeping the way we achieve high availability and enable scale consistent. The infrastructure backing the VCF management services is referred to as the VCF services runtime. You can see over here. The VCF services runtime is a set of virtual machines that run on the management domain in each VCF instances. It's on these VMs that we host the services that make up the VCF management services. So basically, in short, there's a couple of VMs that run all these services. It's running Kubernetes underneath. So all the services and components has been modularized into Kubernetes services. The services running on top of these VCF services runtime are called, as I mentioned, components. So they generally fall into 2 buckets. So first, we have the fleet level components, like the fleet lifecycle and log management. So, these are typically deployed once per fleet and shared across the VCF instances. So just imagine you have multiple instances, okay, and then you have the first VCF instances that has shared component like the log management, and the real-time metrics and things like that. So the rest then are the instance level components, meaning a new instance is deployed with each VCF instances. So two important things to call out here. The first thing is that the VCF services runtime are centrally managed from the VCF operations. To view the status of the services runtime or to add additional components, you can navigate to the Build tab in the VCF operations, which I will show you later on. Second, while many of these components are automatically deployed by default as part of the VCF instance deployment, several key services like the identity broker, the software depot, right, real-time metrics, as well as the log management. So, sorry, the real-time metrics and the log management and the identity broker. These are like the day two components. So they must be deployed as a day two operations for VCF operations. So as I mentioned in the last slide, the underlying infrastructure backing the VCF management services is the VCF services runtime, which is a dedicated set of VMs running in the management domain in each VCF instance. So out of the box, the services runtime is deployed with 4 virtual machines, but can dynamically scale up to as many as 9 VMs based on the requirements and day 2 components choices. Your architecture model also drives the VM count. So for example, in a simple topology, you have 1 control plane and at least 3 worker nodes. So upgrading to high availability topology steps up to 3 control planes nodes with worker nodes scaling out to match your deployment requirement. The best part of this is that you do not need to worry about how to manage this. The VCF services runtime will automatically scale as your environment grows or as you layer on more components. So here you can actually see a screenshot from vSphere client showing VCF services runtime environment currently utilizing 8 virtual machines. So depending on whether you are starting fresh or upgrading, how you get these VCF management services up and running changes slightly. So for clean, new greenfield deployments, the initial configuration is handled directly through the VCF installer, which later on I will show you in the demo. So if you are upgrading from a previous version of Cloud Foundation, that process is driven out from VCF operations. So for example, in my lab, I have installed VCF 9.02. So, for me to get the VCF management services, I actually have to use VCF operations to create these services runtime. Okay. So to kick off the deployment, you need to provide a bit of networking information to the installer. So first up is the range of IP address to be used by the VCF services platform. Okay, over here. So to get started, you will need a range of 12 IP addresses, consecutive IP addresses. However, if you plan to deploy any of the optional day 2 components, like for example, like the real-time metrics or log management, we highly recommend providing a range of 30 IP addresses upfront so that you will not need to add more IPs later on. So along with the IP block, you will also need to configure 3 distinct FQDNs. One for the VCF services runtime, one for the fleet components, okay, and one for the instance component. So just a quick architecture note here, the individual IP address you assign for all these FQDN actually need to sit outside the consecutive IP range that you provide for the platform itself. So if you look at the screenshot on the slide, it shows an example of the value used in the new deployment. So this is also new in VCF 9.1, which is how we handle licensing, and we introduce a new VCF license server. So starting in 9.1, licenses for your VCF infrastructure and management components are stored inside a dedicated license appliance. Think of it as a highly secured, hardened repository right inside your environment to safeguard your licensing data. So as you know, like prior version, the licensing is actually sitting inside VCF ops, VCF operations. So in 9.1, this is actually a separate appliance, as you can see from the screenshot. So the best part of this, you do not have to build this manually. the appliance is auto-deployed into the management domain during a fresh installation or upgrade, and its ongoing lifecycle is fully managed by VCF operations. Architecture-wise, it's highly flexible. For most deployment, a single license server is all you need. It provides a unified centralized repository for your entire VCS fleet. However, if your organization requires administrative segregation for multi-tenancy purposes, or if you are dealing with strict geographic distribution, you can optionally scale up and deploy additional license servers to fit those needs. All right, so having talked through about all these different components and construct, let us jump into the VCF management services demo. All right, so I'm going to introduce you the services runtime over here. So as you can see, I already have deployed the services runtime, and you can see that I have different components over here. Okay, so such as the real-time metric store, as well as the log management. Okay, so before you can deploy some of these components, you actually need to have the services runtime running. So just give me a minute. Okay, so as you can see here, this is the services runtime. Let me blow this up a bit. And you can see that I have, this is 9.1 running, right? So this is all the FQDN. And you can see that I actually have 3 control plane, 1, 2, 3, and 4 worker nodes. Okay, so it's slightly different from what you've seen on the slides just now, right? So in my environment, I actually have 7 VMs rather than 8 VMs. Okay, so once you set up all this services runtime, you can actually then go and deploy the components. And there's a few things that you can actually do over here. So you can actually scale out your nodes, right? Increase storage size and things like that. So in my lab, previously, I started off with just a simple topology, right? With 1 control plane and 3 worker nodes. And then later on, I actually scale up because I want to deploy the log management and metric server. So back to the components. So you can then, after you deploy the services runtime, add different components. So as you can see that my real-time metrics and log management is actually grayed out here because I already have deployed in my environment. But let's say, for example, you want to deploy the components such as VCF operations for network. You can actually click on it. You can choose the different size, and then they will tell you, what are the resource required. You do not need to scale out your services runtime platform manually. As the platform deems need, they will actually scale up for you. Okay, so once you select the size, it will tell you the requirements, and then normally you need to put in some IP address or FQDN, right? And then you can start the deployment from there. Okay. Yeah, so this is from the VCF operations view. So you might be interested in how it actually looks like in vCenter. So in vCenter itself, as you can see, there is this VCF services runtime, right? Management services runtime. So you can see that there is 7 VMs running over here. So the 4 vCPU are the ones that's running the control plane, and then the 24 vCPU ones are the the worker nodes. Okay, so yeah, this is being taken care by the services runtime. They can scale out and scale it back automatically, right? So there is this VCF services runtime template here. So once you start the installation of the services runtime, they will have template, and then you will start cloning the virtual machine to be the control plane as well as the worker nodes. Okay, so now let's go back to the slides. So next topic we have, let me bring up the slides. Okay, next topic we're going to talk about the VCF 9.1 installer. So now we have covered the high-level VCF architecture, right? It's time to move on from the theory to practice, right? So we want to look at how can you actually bring up the fleet as well as the services runtime, right? So in this section, I will deep dive into the technical implementation, specifically how we use the VCF installer to build and deploy a VCF private cloud. So what is the VCF installer? So the VCF installer is a lightweight unified appliance that simplifies the day zero experience by providing a streamlined path from initial download to staging the core installation binaries. The VCF installer is easily downloaded as a single OVA file directly from the Broadcom software portal. The initial setup is remarkably lightweight. When you deploy the appliances, you only need to provide like the basic IP information, IP address, subnet mask, get onto the network, and then from there you can actually log on to the UI interface. I'll show you later on in the demo. So once you deploy, you can configure the software depot and download the VCF software binaries. The software depot provides a single location for downloading all the required VCF installation binaries. In addition, the binary downloads are secured with your Broadcom activation code. The VCF installer supports using either an online software depot for when internet access is available, or an offline software depot when the site is not connected to the internet, thus providing support for both connected and disconnected sites. So as you can see on the screen over here, this is showing you the online depot. So the online depot is the easiest to use. So you simply register the software depot directly over the internet, after which you can immediately begin downloading the VCF binaries that's required for the installation. So the slides you've seen over here show you an example of how you register the online depot from the VCF installer. So if you use a offline depot, there are actually additional steps that you need to first to complete. You will need to set up an external web server, then use the VCF download tool, which I'm going to share a bit more later on, right? To download the VCF binaries, put them and copy them into the web server, okay? So a bit more involved than the online depot, but the noted benefit here is that it works for sites that are disconnected from the internet, like air-gapped environment and things like that. So in either case, whether is it the online or the offline depot, so once the depot has been configured and the binary is downloaded, you are ready to begin the VCF deployment. So whether you are using the intuitive UI wizard or the automated JSON imports, VCF ensures deployment success through a rigorous validation engine that matches the environmental issues before installation begins. So what does that mean? So deploying Cloud Foundation with the VCF installer is easy and efficient. In most cases, especially when doing a first-time deployment, you will use the wizard-driven UI. The intuitive UI guides you through the deployment, prompting you each step of the way for the required input parameters. So once all the parameters has been provided, an extensive validation of the target environment is performed. Upon successful validation, the installer proceeds to automate the deployment of the VCF fleet. During the deployment, you can actually track the progress directly from the installer UI itself. Along with using the intuitive wizard-driven UI, the VCF installer also supports providing the site-specific parameters using a JSON file. This is helpful when needing to do a custom deployment or in situation where you need to do repeated installations. In this advanced scenario, you simply save the input parameter in a JSON file. Then you can import into the installer to be validated. In fact, we find that many customers like to use the wizard to do their first deployment and then save the configuration as a JSON template that they can actually use for future deployments. So in either case, the VCF installer makes deployment or deploying the Cloud Foundation easy. You simply provide the required input parameters, let the installer perform its extensive validation of the environment, and when ready, let it automate the deployment of the VCF fleet. right? So this is the JSON, okay? You can see over the screen over here. The VCF installer in 9.1, okay, also includes this built-in planning guidance. So this is new in 9.1. So very, very early in the VCF installer wizard workflow, the installer will factor in your deployment choices. Things like your choice of your storage, choice of your high availability model versus simple model, and the size of the deployment, and actually calculate how much CPU, RAM, and storage you need, along with the required VLANs, FQDNs, and IP address. So this helps to take the guesswork out of trying to predict the resources you need for your deployment, ensuring you are ready to go before you hit the final deploy button. So yeah, I can show you this later on in the demo. Okay. So before we go to the demo, right, I need to talk about the deploying new fleets as well as expanding to the existing fleet. So the VCF installer is a long-term management tool that enables you to seamlessly expand your fleet or add deferred deployments as your infrastructure requirements evolve. So what does this mean? Okay, so the VCF installer is not just only used for deploying your greenfield VCF fleet deployment, but also to use to add VCF instances to your existing fleet. So for example, you deploy your first fleet already, then later on you need to deploy subsequent VCF instances. You can actually use back this VCF installer. So in addition, the installer supports advanced deployment. For example, you may want to defer some components at the time of the initial deployment and return to deploy them later. So like, for example, like you have a custom deployment where you want VCF operations and VCF automation to run on virtual networks rather than traditional VLANs. To do this, you would select the deferred components path in order to quickly stand up the core fleet components. And then after you have configured the virtual networks, rerun the installer later to add the deferred components. So this flexibility allows you to deploy and scale your private cloud at a pace that matches your specific networking or business requirement. So lastly, the VCF provides a low-friction entry point through convergence, allowing you to transform existing vSphere environments into a fully managed VCF workload domains without a complete rip and replace. So beyond the greenfield deployments, we know that many of you aren't starting from a blank slate. So this brings us to this key feature of VCF installer that's referred as convergence. So what does convergence actually mean? So if you already have a VCF environment running, meaning a vCenter and one or more clusters, you don't have to tear down the cluster or mess with the migrating workloads in order to move to VCF. You can simply point the installer at the existing vSphere environment and converge into a VCF domain. Okay, when doing a converged deployment, the installer first validate the existing components, then deploy any additional components needed to convert the environment into a VCF instance, such as NSX, VCF management services, as well as operations. So this makes it very easy to get started with VCF, as you can simply identify an existing vSphere environment and use it to build your first VCF instance. And with that, let's jump into the VCF 9.1 installer demo. Okay, so as I mentioned previously, it's really simple to install the installer. So this is the newly 9.1 installer that I just deployed yesterday. So all you need is just download the OVA file and then create this, and yeah, it's a pretty lightweight, as you can see over here. Okay, and then once you deploy power on, right, you log on to the UI, and then you are greeted with this screen. Okay, so the first thing first, usually you need to download your binaries. Okay, so you need to go into depot settings, and again you can see that there's different options over here. You have the online depot. Sorry, just want to make sure that you guys can see all the Okay, so far so good. Okay, so you have two options. You have the online depot as well as the offline depot, correct? So the online depot, right, you have the service ID. So what you need to go do is go to the BSC portal and then put in the activation, use the service ID, then get the activation code, right? And then you authenticate. And from there, then you can start downloading the binaries, okay? The other option is the offline depot, just mentioned. So you actually need to specify the web server, and then you must support the HTTPS protocol, okay? And then put in the username and password. But before you can do that, you actually need to download the binaries first, okay? So you have to use the VCF download tool, which I will show you later on via some screenshots, okay, how to actually use the VCF download tool and then put into an external web server and then use that external web server here and to connect as a offline depot, okay? So this is the offline depot. So whether you use the online or offline depot, basically you need to have the binary, okay? Once you have the binary, you can start deploying, okay? So you have two options. You can either deploy using the wizard or you deploy using the JSON spec. Okay, so if you already, this is not your first VCF instance deployment, you can actually download if you have the JSON spec, you can actually upload the JSON spec. So I'm going to show you the wizard. So this is let's say for example, this is my first fleet deployment. So I will choose the VCF Cloud Foundation. So as you can see, it will give you some notes, right? And some steps, step by step, to say that, okay, you need to start planning first, and then you prepare your configuration, and you can actually start the deployment. So this is a fleet, right? So I choose here. As you can see, you can use the installer to deploy a new fleet or deploy a new VCF instance. Yeah, I'm going to deploy a new fleet. So over here, you can actually select whether you have existing operations instances or existing vCenter. You might want to converge, right? Or you have existing VCF automation instances, okay? And then, yeah, you can select the different options, right? So whether you want medium or large, right? And then what it does, it actually tells you how much resources that you actually need, right? So just like you can see the large deployment increases the requirements, right? Okay, so this is new, right? This is new in 9.1. So it actually tells you upfront how much resources that you actually need. And then, of course, you go and configure your network configuration, right? Choose the storage that you want, okay? vSAN ESA, and then you can download as a template, okay? So once you download as a template, you can actually reuse it when you want to do a deployment next time, okay? So it'll give you a summary and things like that. Okay, so I'm not going to deploy it. I'm going to save and close. Yeah, you can actually resume it, right? The process. So if you don't want, you can actually cancel. So for example, now I actually have the JSON spec, which I downloaded. And what you can do is you can actually drag the JSON file. Okay, in here you have still an option that you can actually edit it in the wizard. If not, you can actually go straight with the validation and start your deployment. Right, you can actually go back to the wizard. Right, it will take up some of the values that you have, and then you can actually edit your configuration or settings from there. All right, so that's the VCF 9.1 installer demo. I will go back onto the slides. And next topic, it's on fleet level binary management. The central software depot automates the retrieval and staging of binaries, giving administrators flexible schedule control over both online and offline update sources. So, of course, the process for tracking and managing software updates for the private cloud starts with setting up the software depot and download binaries. Very similar like the VCF installer that you saw. Okay, but this is fleet level, right? This is the fleet level services, the depot service. Okay, which I'm going to show you in the demo later on as well. So VCF operations provide you with a choice how to configure your software depot. You can choose between a connected mode, right? So this one, connected mode, offline depot, or a disconnected mode. Okay, we will discuss all this in more detail in a minute. So one thing worth noting here is that the default software depot configuration, including your access code, is automatically carried over from the VCF installer during deployment. So you remember, like in the VCF installer, you can, after you activate, right? Yeah, this access code is actually being carried over to the centralized fleet depot. Okay. So however, you can only switch your software depot types at any one time. At any time, sorry. So you can change different, like you can change from connected to offline depot. However, you can only be connected to one type of depot at one time. Okay. So once connected to a software depot, you have a centralized view of all the available software binaries and updates, including the upgrade packages, components, credit patches, as well as the new installation binaries. So also you can choose when to download the binaries. You can choose to download the binaries manually or schedule them for off-peak hours to save bandwidth. Okay, so these are the different way that you can actually connect to the depot. So yeah, the connected depot definitely is the quickest and easiest way to get all the VCF binaries. However, this is not practical for like disconnected site. Like I mentioned, you have air-gapped environments, or you are working in the financial industry, you won't be able to connect directly to the internet and things like that. So for these sites, we need to provide support for the disconnected and offline depot. So in order for us to configure a disconnected offline depot, you actually need to use the VCF download tool, right? So it's a on command line utility that you actually need to download separately, run on a machine that has internet access. Okay, so this download tool will go and fetch all the binaries from the online depot, right? And that's why it needs the internet access. So after registering the tool and receiving an access code, you can use it to securely download the VCF software binaries and patches. So once downloaded, they can either upload them directly to the VCF operations. This is known as a disconnected mode, or like what we call as site loading, or uploading to a local web server and configure it as an offline depot. Do require some extra steps. They ensure that, they ensure that even disconnected sites can benefit from the same automated lifecycle efficiency as a connected site. So you can see from the screenshot over here, so this is the VCF download tool, right? This is the command line utility that I mentioned before. So this, I can maybe blow up bigger, right? So you can see that this is a download command, and then we mentioned it. So you need the token file here, right? Like what I mentioned, and then you specify as an automated install, right? This is the install binaries. So what it does, it will fetch all the binaries for you, right? So do the screen estate. I'll just cut short here, but in the next screen you can actually see that these are all the binaries that I actually downloaded at one go. Okay, so this is the external web server that we created. So with the help of another VMware member, we actually explored this in his lab. Okay, so that's the you can use that as a offline depot. Okay, so for some reasons, like for example, you can't provide a certificate, right? And when you're trying to deploy, for example, like the metric server as well as the fleet management components where you run it on the services runtime, sometimes it will complain that you actually need a cert. So what you actually can do, you can actually use the site loading method. The other use case is you don't have an external web server. You just want to site loading directly to the VCF ops. That is also possible. Okay. So you can use the same tool, right? The VCF download tool, right? In this case, where you already have the binaries downloaded, you can actually upload them, and then you specify, you need to specify the password of your SDC manager, and you can actually upload all this into the VCF ops. Okay. So once uploaded or site loaded, then you can use the binary list command to actually show you what are the binaries that are actually being uploaded into your fleet depot. Okay, so this is useful when you are start deploying your depot service. Okay, I just want to see the chat. Hopefully everything is good. Okay, that's good. Yeah, so before I jump on to the demo, right, I will just show it to you. So let me switch again. Okay, so previously I showed you the services runtime. So this is the fleet depot, right? As you can see, I'm actually connecting to an offline depot. Okay, so once you connect to it, you can actually see the binary. So for example, over here, just now I did show you. I show you the upgrade, right? So like if you go to the binary management, right, all this is being managed in the fleet depot service now, right? As what you mentioned here in your software depot, right? You can change it, right? Like what I say, you can change it to a different modes, right? Connected or disconnected mode, you can change, but you can only use one at one time, right? So now everything now is being managed in the fleet level, and then you can see the binary management over here. Okay. Then install binaries. You can see, and then you can say you want to download immediately, or you can, you tell you what's available, what's being downloaded, right? And then you can download immediately, or you can schedule the download later on. All right, so let's go back to the slides. Okay, the last topic on the centralized lifecycle management. So this is used for patching and upgrading. So after we use the VCF installer to deploy our VCF fleet, so our focus now shift from the deployment to maintenance. Okay, so in this section, we will explore how we can actually use VCF operations to manage software updates, thus providing a centralized, automated approach to the ongoing patching and upgrading of your entire VCF fleet. So VCF operations provide a single pane of glass for the entire private cloud, eliminating the complexity of managing disparate software stacks and interfaces. So in VCF, we have consolidated lifecycle management across the entire VCF fleet into a single unified interface within VCF operations. So you no longer need to jump between different UIs or spend time researching interoperability and compatibility matrices. So VCF consolidate everything into one place and guides you through the process of updating each component. So from the VCF operations, you are able to view, plan, and upgrade both the VCF fleet components and the individual workload domains that make up your VCF instances. By centralizing the core components and the management components into VCF operations, VCF ensures a consistent, repeatable experience for tracking and applying software update across your entire private cloud. So within VCF operations, lifecycle management is divided into two sections. The management components, which include things like VCF operations, VCF automation, VCF logs, VCF operations for network. So these components are managed and updated as part of the VCF management services. So later on, I will show you in the demo. The VCF instances, which are the core SCDC components that make up of the workload domains to run within each VCF instance. This includes like the SCDC manager, vCenter servers, NSX manager, and ESX host. Okay, by centralizing the core components and the management components into VCF operations, VCF now ensures a consistent, repeatable experience for tracking, applying software updates across your entire private cloud. So VCF operations enable intelligent upgrade planning, which remove the guesswork of component interoperability by automatically enforcing the correct installation sequence across the SDDC stack. So once the software depot has been set up and the binary is downloaded, you are ready to plan for your software updates. So this is where the intelligence of VCF really shines. Okay. So instead of spending time researching how to upgrade each component and manually cross-referencing compatibility metrics, you simply tell VCF if you want to apply a patch or perform an upgrade. So VCF will then automatically evaluate your current version against your desired target version and generate a step-by-step plan that you follow to apply the updates. So in this slide, I'm showing an example of the plan that was created to upgrade a workload domain from VCF 5.2 to VCF 9.1. So we can see that from this plan, involved like a 5-step process, right? Over here, you can see. And we can start by staging the vCenter upgrade, okay? Then upgrading the NSX, and then switch to a new vCenter. Then we upgrade the ESXi host, and then finish the upgrading by upgrading the NSX edge nodes. Okay. So this is the 5-step process. So VCF understands all the interdependencies between the vCenter, NSX, and ESXi, ensuring that each component is updated in the exact order required. So do note that the patches and upgrades within the Cloud Foundation private cloud are applied to each workload domain independently. This eliminates the need to upgrade everything at once, allowing you to seamlessly roll updates in over time. So finally, I'd like to wrap up this section by calling out what perhaps the most critical step to apply software updates in Cloud Foundation. This is running a pre-check. VCF provides pre-checks at both the domain and component levels. These checks help to validate the health of the domain prior to attempting an upgrade. The checks looks for everything from general health issues to specific upgrade readiness blockers. We are constantly upgrading the checks with every release to account for the latest known issues and environmental variables. While these are run before an upgrade, we recommend running them routinely as part of your standard operations. By proactively identifying and resolving health warnings, which you can export via CSV for deeper analysis, you ensure your environment is always upgrade ready. This instills confidence that when you do decide to move to the next version, the process will be smooth and successful. So this concludes this section on building and deploying a private cloud. I'll now show you some demo on the fleet operations. So let me check on the chat messages. Let me see the Q&A thing. Okay. Wow, so many questions. Hopefully all has been addressed. Okay, let's now jump to the fleet operation demo. Okay, so we are still on this build tab. Okay, so for example, okay, I need to, okay, so just to give you some context here, my environment, I install it as a VCF 9.02, and I'm in the process of upgrading it to 9.1. So some components are already 9.1. So for example, you know, my SDDC manager and my VCF operations are already 9.1. So, you know, these are like more like the fleet level management, right? So if you go to the VCF, the fleet management, you can see that it also has this upgrade tab over here. So this upgrade tab is more for the, when you're under the VCF management, these are more like for the fleet upgrade process, right? So you can actually say which versions that you want to do. You can set the target version, okay? For example, for now, I'm setting up the target version to be 9.1, right? So, you know, you can run the pre-checks like I mentioned, okay? And then you have the upgrade path here. So for example, like I haven't upgraded my VCF automation. So my VCF automation is still 902. So I can actually use this tool to actually upgrade to VCF operations to upgrade to 9.1. Right? Of course, there is some pending configuration, as you can see over here, that requires me, like for example, to specify the CIDR and services runtime for VCF automation and things like that. Okay, so I have to do this, run the pre-checks, and then start upgrading. So these are more for the fleet level type of services. Okay, so let me see. Okay, so you can see that most of my fleet components are all on 9.1. Okay, so now let me go into the instances. So the instances also have an upgrade component, right? So these are things that you upgrade, right? So in the domain management components, you have, like for example, the SDDC manager, the NSX and vCenter. So you can see that some of it I already have upgraded. So for example, like the SDDC manager is really on the target version that I have. And then for vCenter, it's also upgraded. So like what I mentioned in the slides, there is actually the process, the 5-step process. So once you choose the target, right, it will give you this plan. Right? So you can see that this plan that I have. So there is 5 steps, and I already have finished the first 3 steps. So you can see that because mine is a 902 to 9.1, it actually shows differently from the plan that was shown in the slide, which is based on 5.2 to 9.0 or 9.1, right? So mine is actually upgrading the SDC manager first, right? Then we move on to upgrading the NSX manager. Then we upgrade the vCenter, okay? And then we upgrade the host, and then the NSX H clusters. So, I was in the middle, and I'm doing this webinar, so I'm just going to do it later once this webinar finish. Then I can actually complete the installation. Again, similar like the fleet management components, you can always run a pre-checks before doing the upgrade. And this is actually recommended. All right, so that sums up the final demo, and I will just provide you with a summary of what we have covered so far today. Let me jump back to the slides. Okay, wow, time's really flies, and we covered so many things in today's session, right? So we introduced all the different components in VCF Private Cloud, the VCF fleet, the VCF instances, the workload domains, and we talk about the regions, and we talk about having different multiple different instances, the ways that you can actually use the workload domains and things like that. Next, we also talk about the VCF management services platform, right? So this is new in 9.1. You need to take note of it because it will consume some additional virtual machines or appliances. So the different components that we have, such as the log management, the real-time metrics, right? Things like that, right? And of course, we also talk about what are some of the fleet level components and some of the domain level components. Then we also talk about the binary management, right? The different depot modes that you need to have, right? So that you can actually get your binaries for installation, for upgrading, and things like that. And importantly, we also covered the VCF download tool for the offline depot as well as the disconnected mode, right? So this is very useful, right? Especially you have an air gap environment, right? Definitely need to use this tool on your web server and then connect to it as an offline depot, or you want to side load into your fleet depot, okay? So lastly, we also wrap things up on using the VCF operations, which I just showed you, right? You can provide centralized lifecycle management. So you can use it for planning, patching, and upgrading for both fleet level components as well as your VCF instances. So I thank you so much for having me today in the previous webinar. And now I just hand it over to Hadi.
Yep. Good. Thank you. Thank you, Vincent. And also thank you to Alec, Arun, and David, who answered a ton of questions. So I must say it must have been a very good session for all of you. Don't you all agree? So if you agree, please, drop a little like or thumbs up in the chat for Vincent. I'm sure he'll appreciate that. I also know everyone has been asking about certifications, so please really look into the prerequisites needed. try and visit the Broadcom VCF certification page for more info. Right. We will also reach out to you for the certification vouchers. So if you have attended all 4 live sessions, we'll try and match that out and we'll make sure that we get in touch with you soon. We also will be sharing the recordings of all the sessions soon. So keep an eye out in your inbox. Lastly, we also need your feedback. So you can see the feedback link. Click the link in the chat and please complete the feedback. This will help us to improve, to deliver more sessions that are very valuable to you and also for your organization to help you to the journey of adopting VCF 9.1. All right. Now, with that, I'd like to thank everyone once again. And so thank you for your time. Till the next time we all meet again. Take care. And thank you once again for attending today.
Speakers and panelists can drop off.
Some questions still in the chat.
Maybe we hang on a minute and just let them finish the questions.